finally, we've got all the components that we need. Now, all of this needs to fit behind this monitor and nestle inside the frame. We've got our power supply. We've got our DC converter. I just want to make a note that I did change the plug that's going into the back of the monitor because the other one did not fit. Just do the same due diligence and make sure that you're plugging in this case, it's the white one. That's the positive. That goes in the monitor. This goes into the Raspberry Pi. We've mapped that. We made sure that we got the right power. We've got the VGA to HDMI connector. We've got the VGA cable. This one's a little bit long, but I'm just going to kind of spread it out so that it all fits in here. We've got some zip ties that are going to help us out, some double-sided tape, just a few tools, and these zip tie connectors. Now, when you lay this out, it's going to be how it fits best for you. I'm putting this together in a video just because it just took me a little bit of figuring out. So let's just lay out the important components that we're going to need. All right, so we definitely need this adapter, and it's a little bit longer than it needs to be, so we got to kind of figure out how that's going to lay out here. So I'm just going to move things around before I really stick them in place, just to kind of get a feel for it. I need access to these pins, so once we put that wood strip on the back, I don't think I'll get that access, so that's something to consider. Right here, I got a little short stub that's going to go to the power supply, and that's going to kind of determine where this DC converter is going to go. We're not going to plug that in just yet because we want to make sure that everything's all going. Let's see. Now this, we're going to have to sort of snake it around to fit inside the power for the Raspberry Pi, so that can go in there now. You see the Versa holes that are on the back of this mount, and just remembering that we're going to have that wood strip there. The height of all of these right now is the same height as the back of this monitor, which is very convenient. All right, maybe I think that this is pretty much where I'm going to start by putting this piece in here. I'm going to put it just a bit on a diagonal, just to give me a little bit more room to kind of move the wires around. So very first thing we're going to do is get that double-sided tape. I'm just going to neaten it up just a little bit here. And then we're going to stick our first piece on here. We laid it out because once you put it in place, you want to make sure that's where it's going to stay. So that's been put together. Now we got to kind of just move some things around, clean up some stuff, and really just take a few minutes to kind of figure out how this is going to lay out so that I have access to those pins. Okay, so by sliding the Raspberry Pi down, I want to be able to give myself access to the USB connector as well as those pins. So that's going to cause me to move the wire around a little bit so that it's not behind that wood strip that we have. But I know that this is where the Raspberry Pi is going to go, so we're going to take and we're going to click, put some sticky tape on there just to hold it in place. And that goes underneath. Okay. So lay this out first before you make these connections, just because you don't want to be pulling things back and forth. And it can change a little bit. But I'm going to have access to that USB so I can plug in a keyboard if I have any problems or I want to troubleshoot or even update. Then that's going to make this cable go around the outside, and then this power supply is going to come around the front side. So let's start cleaning up some of our cables and get this power supply sorted out so that it's not going to be in the way of that wood strip that I use to connect it. I always just grab a pair of pliers to connect these just because I've got big fingers, and that makes my life a little bit easier. So once that sticks, it's just really a matter of kind of pulling everything together, and this is going to take the stress off of the terminal pins that are actually connecting the wires. The ones from the power supply are pretty beefy, but the one going to the USB cable is a lot thinner gauge and more difficult, delicate. So just zip these together, and leave it a little loose if you want to, but I'm going to tighten this up just because I'm pretty sure this is where this one's going to go. Okay, little pair of snips, takes off the end, and then Klein cleans that up. Now, I've got a little bit of a tight spot here to get this behind that wood strip that's holding in the monitor to the back of the frame and into the Raspberry Pi. A little hindsight, I might have cut this a little bit bigger so you can go around the outside. So that's just something to think about as I do this. Now we've got the VGA cable. Now there's a lot of extra cable here that I've got to kind of find a way to keep out of the way. So we're going to continue moving and cleaning things up by getting this power supply secured so that it's going to slide through the little opening I do have that's going to go between the Raspberry Pi case and that wood strip holding in the monitor to the frame. So again, this just clicks in, and then this one I'm not going to zip too tight, just until I get that wood strip on to make sure that I've got enough slack for this to go through and not get pinched. So we'll just leave that for now until I'm a little bit more certain that this is where it's going to be. Okay, so now let's take a look at the monitor cable that's going to go up here, since I've got to kind of loop that around the back. I'm going to connect this VGA adapter and secure that, and by securing it, it's not going to want to pull out. As we're putting everything together, once this gets behind it, the worst thing is if this pulls out of the Raspberry Pi or I lose connection, and then all of our work up to this point, we're going to have to take it apart, go back in and make that connection. So just put a little zip tie on there, make sure it's tight, and then you can quickly clean it up. And then we're going to find a way to just see, well, we're not going to find a way. We're going to see how this snakes best up and around. It would have been smart to have bought a smaller cable, but I didn't have a smaller cable. I didn't really think it was necessary, since all of this is going to get hidden behind the monitor screen itself. So I'm going to use the existing cable zip tie mount that I have here just to connect the VGA cable and to get this to go in between the DC converter and the actual back of the monitor, that raised section that's there. Yeah, so sometimes a little bit tight, but keep at it. They'll slide through. This kind of tells you maybe don't tighten them all up until you're sure this is where you're going to go. This cable is really tight to the bottom of this. It wasn't designed to be kind of framed in, so we've got that 1/4 inch between the frame and the monitor, and I'm going to need every bit of that to get this VGA cable in at this point. But with everything connected here, that does give me plenty of room to kind of unwrap and then neaten up this longer VGA cable up here in the top. Again, we're not going to see any of this, so at this point, the whole point of getting it neat is just to make sure that we're going to have enough room behind that wood strip that's holding the monitor into the frame itself. Let's see, another connector to kind of hold it, and I'm just going to sort of drape in long loops the VGA cable around so that it'll be able to connect to that adapter and not be over the size of the frame. And this doesn't necessarily have to be how you do it. You can get yourself a smaller monitor, or you might find a better way. Use this video just as kind of a guide to see how I'm managing to fit everything in here. And then we're just going to go underneath, just because that kind of holds the cable together. And I think it's going to be smart to zip tie the ends of these together and really get it so that this just becomes one piece. Right, so just move it out to the outside, put the adapter in the middle. So that lines up pretty well with the VGA cable, so we can go ahead and put that together now and screw it in. Again, the worst thing is going to be if you lose a connection while this whole thing is together, and then you got to take the whole back apart and go back in there and figure it out. But that's screwed in nice and tight. So I'm going to just take a piece of two-sided tape and then hold that top down in the middle of the cable. All right, everything's in there. That's in there, pushed up a little bit. We'll have a cover that'll go on that later. And we're just going to take and move these so that they fight you a little bit, but just kind of bend them gently and slowly wind them out. There is plenty of room up here. It's just a matter of once it's in place, holding it in place. So I'm going to use the existing adapter cable, which is taped down, to hold in these two folds of this bend at the top here. And we'll tighten that down. And then this end can go through that mount that we put in and be zip tied together. And then once we make sure that everything is going to fit nice and neat, we'll go ahead and tighten up the zip ties. And then once they're tight, just go ahead and snip them off, because these are all the components we're going to need back here. Let's see, probably put one more just right here, just to make sure that nothing shifts while I'm trying to get that in and we don't pinch a cable. And looks good. Tighten them up, snip them so that those little ends of the plastic don't get in the way. And let's take a quick look at it. All right, yeah, there's plenty of room there. I got my 1/4 inch for the frame on the top. That's nice and tight. That's not going to pull out. This looks pretty good. So let's see. The very last thing I'm going to want to do here is just take the power cable and connect the power cable here. Yeah, we'll neaten up. Zip ties are cheap. So if you need to snip one and put a new one in, you should have a couple extra on hand. I know I never plan on just getting it done right the first time. So I'll put the power cable here. Actually, that's not in the center, so we're not going to put the power cable there. So I snipped a little early on that one. Just because I think it'd be nice if this was coming down the center of the frame, where this is off center. Just a little thing on my end. You certainly can put it however you like. Again, this is just a reference video. So this VGA cable is just about the center. So I'm going to use the existing power cable going to the Raspberry Pi as a way to control this cable. Just keep it close to the center. It is going to run behind the frame. So that's going to happen. We just want to make sure that we're as close to the center as possible. Okay, now we've got access to our USBs, we've got access to our pins, everything is really solid in here, so it's going to be time to just run a quick test. This is the point where we want to make sure that everything boots up as we have set it up, because we don't want to have to take it apart once it's in the frame. And we plugged that in. The monitor is starting up. The Raspberry Pi started up, so that adapter is powered and working properly. And then this should take us through the startup process we've seen so far. I do notice here that there's a bit. I got a bit of a black stripe on the side of the monitor, and that's just. Well, that's an auto-centering function for the monitor itself. It just might have lost its memory. So there is a function on this monitor to reset, or basically auto-set the center of the image. And I'm just going to click on that real quick. Which one is that button there? Now these buttons are going to be exposed on the outside of the frame. Oh. So you'll be able to access it, turn the monitor on and off, etc. All right, so this worked. It got us started into it, so I could tell that everything's working. I can unplug it at this point, and we're going to take it and overlay the frame and make sure that everything fits once we put on that wood strip. Okay, back after a quick transition, I got the frame. Now it's just going to be a matter of putting everything on here. I got my screws to put everything in tight. Yeah, we're going to just clean up a little bit and, well, assemble this all together for the first time. So this is going to go over that, and the only thing I have to do is this power cord is going to go through the back of the frame. So we're just going to pull the power cord up and through, And then once that's not going to pinch on there, now it's just going to be a matter of gently fitting this in here. I've got a cable right here that's a little pinched on the top and the bottom, and we knew that that was going to be an issue with this just because of how close that VGA connector is to the bottom of the frame itself. So I'm going to pull gently. We don't want to put too much pressure on the end of that cable just because it's got very small gauge wires inside. So the top is fitting in. That's just a little bit of a slide, and then those cables pull in. And then the bottom is fitting in. All right, so this is pretty good. Now, it's just a matter of making sure that that wood strip is going to fit. So we're going to grab that, and first thing we have to check is just that that power cable is not getting pinched, and there is just enough room there that it slides down and behind. So lining up the holes in the middle with the Versa mount on the back of the monitor, that's going to make sure that we get everything centered. We did screw this in beforehand, so that's going to be helpful. Once we center it, then it's just going to be a matter of lining up the holes since we already made them. All right, not too bad. Let's grab our screws then. And I'm going to put this, let me see, I'm going to put the Versa screws in first to connect to the monitor. That way I can center it on the outer wood screws. These are the M4 metrics, and they screw right into the back of those 4 holes that we set up on the back of the Versa mount, which comes standard on most monitors. So even if you're not using this monitor, you're pretty much guaranteed to have that type of connection on the back, unless it's a very specific type of monitor. All right, and I'm not going to screw these in all the way. We're just doing a dry fit here. Make sure that nothing is pinching. All right, and make sure that not put any type of drill or tools on this now that we have this monitor on the face of it. And now that that's in, looking and lining up these wood screws with the ones that we had already put in is going to make sure that the monitor is centered as we put it in the very last time. And a little bit of pushing. And then this is, it's just small motions. You don't want to put any undue pressure on anything. Once this is up and in place, it's going to be pretty sturdy. So this is just making sure that none of the connections come out and everything that we've zip tied in stays nice and solid. I've seen a lot of projects where unfortunately you've gone through a lot of work, but then you have the problem where you're not actually, you lose a wire right in the middle of it. So just for this, just to make sure it looks centered, I'm just going to put 2 screws in to start. And once I get screwed in, we're just going to flip it over and make sure it looks like it's seated in the middle of the frame on the other side. So not bad. That looks good. Everything's tight. And we'll flip it. And yeah, that looks great. That's sitting exactly as it was sitting before, right in the middle of the cork board. And we got access to our buttons. I gotta dust this off a little bit, and the next step is going to be just finalizing everything and getting it ready to hang on the wall. There's it from the back. Got a very, very low profile, so we just have that board, and I might take and put a couple of spacers here so that that's offset enough that it's not going to scratch the wall with any of the screws. All right, on to the next part, where we need to put in the motion sensor. So I haven't actually put this in yet because I didn't know where it was going to be in relation to the GPO pin. So we have to wait. We had to wait till the very end of this just to see where this is going to fit. And I see that if I were to put this in the center on the bottom of the frame, I have enough room to reach those GPO pins. So I want to make sure that that's going to go in the center. And I also want to make sure that we're going to be able to fit the Raspberry Pi cover on. There should be enough room for this with those GPO pins jumpers, with the GPIO jumpers fitting through the cover and connecting to the GPIO pins. So we're just going to do a dry test now. Remember that 2 is red, 6 is black, and 10 is blue. I'm going to stress again that if you do connect these wires in the incorrect order, you can send voltage down a data line, and you can unfortunately do damage to the chip itself. So with that laid out, I now have to cut a hole for this motion sensor to go in. So I got to run down to the shop just to make that hole, and I'm going to do that and then come back, and we'll put it all together and then run another test of the entire thing. Okay, we're here. I've got that all drilled out. It's seated in there, so just the very front of it is laid out. And now we're going to run a full test of everything in its finished form. So with this here, that's going to be where the motion is. The frame is all connected and it's nice and tight, so it's just a matter of plugging in the power supply and seeing where we go. All right, fingers crossed. This is the big test to make sure we didn't cross any wires. There's no issues in the back. Everything stayed connected, and all our hard work paid off. Right off the bat, it's working great. We're getting power to the monitor. We're getting power to the Raspberry Pi. Everything's booting as we've seen in the past. And then that brings us to our start screen. From the start screen, it's going to log on, connect to the Wi-Fi, and then jump into the calendar, and that's perfect. Great. So far up to this point, everything is great. Now, every time where it sees motion, it is hitting the escape button, which is causing something to happen. So I'm just going to step out and get below, or just out of the range of the motion sensor for the moment, so that it has that time to go into the slideshow mode. And let's see, we're almost there. And this has all worked before. We're just doing, like I said, a final test, make sure none of those pins are pinched, and everything is working. All right, slideshow. This is stressful after working so long on this project. And once it does go to slideshow, it is. All I have to do is wave my hand in front of the motion sensor, and it hits the escape. It goes and comes back to the calendar. Very excited. This is working perfectly, and everything's all set up. So now we can hang it on the wall and see what it looks like.